vampires, werewolves, and podcasts. Everybody loves a good Twilight moment, obviously. The books are so stupid and written so weirdly, and obviously they're not great literature, but they're hilarious and comforting and what we need in these dire times. And so, obviously we love a podcast moment too. I'm making a podcast, so we have to love a podcast moment. And so, thank you to Vanessa Zoltan and Julia Argy for combining Twilight and podcasts and giving us Hot and Bothered Twilight in Quarantine, which is this amazing podcast that is so funny and hilarious, and their dynamic is so great, and we get to talk and listen to people talk about Twilight, but also, it's in a podcast. It's great. And also, Vanessa Zoltan, I discovered her or found her through the podcast Harry Potter and the Sacred Text, which she does with Casper ter Kuile. And so I've already loved her before this, and I didn't know about Hot and Bothered, which Hot and Bothered is its own thing that they did before this, and then when quarantine started, they started Hot and Bothered Twilight in Quarantine. But I've known about Vanessa since her Harry Potter and the Sacred Text days, which has been going on for so long. So it's great. I love her, and I'm very happy that she's doing this. Books, TV, music, and movies. All things that make a big impact on everyone. I'm constantly gushing about my latest read to anyone who listens, so I figured I'd turn my rambling into something coherent that people might actually listen to, which means no tuning out halfway through. I am Maya Ghosh, and this is my take. So obviously, since we're reviewing another podcast, there's no writing to look at. So I'm going to kind of break this down based on the different segments of their podcast, starting with the 30-second recap. We love a 30-second recap. This started on Harry Potter and the Sacred Text, and so I love that they've brought it over to Hot and Bothered Twilight in Quarantine. And it's very helpful because I really have forgotten what happens chapter by chapter in Twilight. I remember the overarching plot points and everything, but I've forgotten the details. So it's really nice that they're gonna remind us and give us this kind of chapter breakdown of everything that happened, and just the way that they do it is so different than the way Vanessa and Casper do Harry Potter and the Sacred Text 30-second recaps, which is what I thought would happen. But they're so lighthearted and joking, and I think that really sets the tone for the whole podcast, which is completely lighthearted and jokey, and they recognize that it's just something they're doing for fun to lift people's spirits in quarantine, and their dynamic is very funny, because sometimes one person will do the first half and the second person will do the second half. Sometimes one person will focus on just one thing that happens and the second person will fill you in on everything else. So it's very funny to listen to, and they play off of each other so well, and they're so comedic together, and I love that it comes through even in the 30-second recap, and it's not they're super serious for the 30-second recap and then become super lighthearted later. It's this super lighthearted tone all the way through. And obviously, I need the 30-second recap to understand what's going on, because like I said, you don't remember every single plot point unless you're a Twilight super fan, which I'm not. So it's very helpful. Looking at the next thing is, they added this thing where it's, the things they like about the chapter, and I'm glad that, eventually they added this in, because it's always nice to look at a few things that we like about every Twilight chapter, because as much as, I'm listening to their experience of reading Twilight now and being okay, yeah, there was a lot I missed, I really, so it may be helpful to explain my experience reading Twilight. I read Twilight when I was, kinda on house arrest. I had nothing to do for a week, and I wasn't allowed to, go out or do anything, and we had a week off of school. So, in all of my free time, I just sat and read Twilight, and I read all 4 books in the span of 6 days, and those books are thick. The shortest book is 500 pages or something, it helped me set my record for number of pages I've read in a day. I read the last 200 pages of New Moon and the first 480 pages of Eclipse in one day, for a total of 680 pages, which is the most I've ever read in one day. Probably because the books are so easy to read, because they're so, like, they're just written easy to read. I don't even know how to describe it. If you've ever read Twilight, you know it's like, I don't want to say they're bad, because Stephanie Meyer put a lot of work into them, and, like, I love a romance moment, so I was, like, very invested in the characters, but like I've been saying in previous books, right, it's that writing that's so, like, it's past the point of simple enough for us to easily emotionally invest in characters. It's, like, to the point where the only thing you have to do is emotionally invest in the characters, I guess. But, yeah, so that was my experience reading Twilight. It happened in a very quick succession. I didn't have any time to stop and think about how stupid things were, or how creepy Edward was, or any of the, like, major, like, grievances people have with Twilight. I didn't notice any of that, because I just, like, was in a reading coma and read straight through. So that's why when they're talking about advice or things they found weird in the chapters, I'm like, yeah, but that's not my experience with reading the book, and I understand I need to open my eyes and see, like, how weird Twilight is, and this podcast is helping me do it. But I also am glad that, like, they're honoring the fact that there are some good moments in Twilight, and there is a reason a ton of people fell in love with those books, and that's why I'm very happy that they added, like, things they like about the chapter. And again, their commentary on the things they like about the chapter are so funny. It really is Vanessa and Julia that make this podcast, and that make, like, yes, Twilight's funny, yes, it's really easy to talk about, but, like, I could not have the same conversations about Twilight with my friends who've read Twilight. They just would not be the same and would not be as funny. They'd be interesting and they'd be fun, but they would not be the same as Vanessa and Julia talking about Twilight. So again, like, that's a point I'm sure I'm going to make forever, but it really is their dynamic that's the best. Then moving on to their advice, which is peak Vanessa and Julia in these podcast episodes. The fact that they give advice is just so funny and so great, and, like, they touch on such small moments and bring them to light, and really is, like, when they do that, it's, like, low-key weird, because it is almost like they're reading in depth of the chapter, but also the whole point of the podcast is to, like, make light of things and make people happy. So it's just such this weird dynamic, but it's also so great, and I love it. And I love, like, just their advice on, like, their fashion advice to people about, like, one episode they were talking about how Edward wears too much beige, and so he needs to go all in and wear it completely beige. And, like, that episode, or not that episode, because this happens in every episode, but their advice for Edward on how to be, like, first of all, a better vampire, with the fact that he should turn into a flock of bats and fly, and the fact that he's, like, a weird boyfriend and shouldn't, you know, be so creepy and not, you know, stalk Bella and not tell Bella, like, look, I could kill you, but I'm not, and, like, do you really want to be with me? I could kill you, and, like, emphasizing the fact that Edward's always like, oh my god, I could kill you, and, like, how weird their relationship is. Like, they really are making me see how weird and creepy Edward and Bella's relationship is, and, like, for as much as okay, so, where do I want to go with this? I don't know how to say this. Okay, so, 50 Shades of Grey is Twilight fanfiction, right? And I may or may not have read 50 Shades of Grey in all 3 books in the 50 Shades of Grey trilogy, but the comparisons you draw between Edward and Bella and Anna and Christian reading 50 Shades of Grey and, like, comparing it to Twilight, like, you usually, at least in my experience, saw Christian and Anna as, like, the weirder couple, and, like, Christian was more controlling and all that stuff. But now, like, looking at Twilight, and especially through this podcast, I realize, like, Edward is controlling, and this relationship is kind of creepy, and Edward and Christian are both, like, really similar. It's not just Christian that's, like, a more fucked up version of Edward. Like, so I don't know why I had to expose myself to make this point, but my point is they're helping me see how weird Edward is. I don't know. This point needs to die. I need to move on. I love that they give advice to Bella on how to be, like, a better human, and the fact that she never eats and she needs to learn how to walk for herself and not let Edward carry her everywhere, and the fact that she's always commenting on the weather or describing rooms like she's a realtor. Like, I love every piece of advice that they give, and I love how they point out stuff that, like, is kind of so obvious, but when you're entranced in the book, or maybe this is just me and the fact that I got so entranced in the book, like, you don't even realize it, and so the fact that they're pointing it out is so funny. And again, it's not the fact that they're pointing it out, it's the way that they're pointing it out is so funny. I love every time they're talking about how Edward has, like, a sing-songy voice, and they start singing, like, what Edward says. I love that. That is, like, one of my favorite moments in the podcast, and they need to do more of that because they've stopped doing it recently, as of the time I'm recording this, and so they need to bring it back. Also their advice for Charlie on how to be a better police chief, because Charlie's low-key a minor character in the Twilight books. Okay, he's obviously a major character, but, like, the whole point of the Twilight books is it focuses on Edward and Bella and, like, kind of Jacob and that love triangle. You forget, like, how bad of a police chief Charlie actually is. He, like, doesn't do anything ever, and I guess Forks has, like, no crime. But still, like, I never really realized how bad of a cop he was, and I'm glad they're giving him advice. And I love when they, like, give somebody advice, and then later on in a chapter, that character fixes that flaw, and they're like, we're so glad you're listening to the podcast. Like, I don't know, I just love this podcast, and it's so funny, and it's so great, and I love it. Then they're, like, final two things. Their first final thing is the Bella Care package, which I love this idea, and I wish I had come up with it. I wish I could steal it and start a segment doing something like that, but now I'd feel bad. But just the fact that, like, they do what everybody thinks, because I always am, when I'm reading books, I'm like, I wish I could give this character this, or I wish I could tell this character this. So the fact that they're, like, being direct about it and being like, yes, I would send her this in a care package, like, I love it. I think it's great. It also makes me think, too, about, like, of the points that they've raised, what would I send Bella in a care package? So it's great. I love it. It's another piece of this podcast that I love. And I love that they're, like, put random things in it, too. It's not, like, the most direct things all the time. It's like, I'm going to send Bella a breathing exercise. I'm going to send Bella saltines so she's not seasick when she rides on Edward's back when he's running around. Like, it's just the wackiest things half the time, but it's so fun and I so love it. And then their final thing would be Vanessa's chapter predictions, and, like, the way that she's so obviously wrong, but it's so funny. Like, she's talking about bear attacks and being mauled by a bear, and Charlie discovering corruption in Forks, and, like, it just, the conspiracy theories that they come up with for this book through Vanessa's final, like, next chapter predictions are so funny, and I would love to see somebody rewrite Twilight using all of Vanessa's chapter predictions. So, like, keep the first chapter of Twilight the same, but then rewrite every single next chapter of Twilight using the predictions that Vanessa has as plot, because I think those books would be so on crack, but so funny to read, and, like, I will pay somebody to do this. I mean, not really, I don't make enough money off this podcast to pay anybody to do it, but, like, I would pay somebody to do it, you know? So to wrap this up, also, in the end, I love how, like, every time it ends, they're like, this has been Twilight in Quarantine, a beautiful 3-bedroom condo from Hot and Bothered, or whatever. Like, they just throw random things in there, and it's, like, so funny, because it always connects to what they were talking about, and I think it's a great way to, like, it's a great way to start the wrap-up, because it is so in tune with the rest of the podcast, being so whimsical and crazy and funny and just, like, making you laugh sort of thing. So I love that they do that. And again, like, I've said this multiple times, but the way that Julia and Vanessa bounce off of each other and connect and talk about stuff, and, like, it just, they work so well together as people and as like partners for this project, they really do make this podcast. Like, I could not do this with one of my friends and have it be so funny. They really are the main reason why I come back to this podcast every day, or not every day because it doesn't come out every day, but every time it comes out, and just like, I need to thank them in this review because they are amazing. Speaking of times it comes out 3 times a week, which is amazing. No podcast that I listen to comes out 3 times a week. And it's not only that it comes out 3 times a week. It comes out 3 times a week, but the episodes are only 20 minutes. So it's super bingeable. Like, Dear Hank and John, which is one of my other favorite podcasts, if it came out 3 times a week, I would be a little overwhelmed because it's a 40-minute episode every time it comes out. And so it's like a lot to listen to, and I want to listen to all of it, but I wouldn't have time to listen to any other podcasts. Whereas this, it comes out 3 times a week, but like, I listen to it when I'm getting ready, and it takes me, 20 minutes to get ready, and then I'm done, and I can listen to another podcast later on in the day. Like, it's so super bingeable, but it's also, like, 20 minutes is the perfect time to talk about it because they cover every point they need to make. It's super funny. It doesn't drag on. It always leaves you wanting a little bit more, which I think is great for, like, wanting to pull more listeners in because you really do want that, like, next chapter kind of thing. It's super great. And, like, I binged the first 10 episodes in, like, 2 or 3 days. So it really is super bingeable, even though they're on chapter, like, 20-something. If you want to catch up, you totally can. And if you don't want to catch up, you can totally start from, like, chapter 20. And if you've already read Twilight, you'll know the parts of the book that they're talking about. So, like, it's just a super accessible podcast because of the number of times it comes out, the number of episodes they have, the length of the episode, the fact that they're talking about something that's so, like, readily available in pop culture and so many people have read this book. It's just, like, it's great, and it's now one of my favorite podcasts, and, like, I really am hopeful. Well, I don't know that this is going to happen. I hope that they continue to do this podcast for all 3 of the next Twilight books because they don't even need to keep releasing 3 episodes a week if quarantine ends. When quarantine ends, quarantine needs to end. But they don't even need to keep releasing 3 episodes a week. I will be happy with 1 episode a week. Hell, 1 episode every 2 weeks, as long as they keep doing this for the next 3 books because I love it and it's so funny. It brings such humor into my life and it's so accessible and so easy, and they're great and amazing, and I need more of this podcast, like, more than just the first Twilight book, because the next 3 Twilight books are really long, so they would be in it for a long haul. We would have this for, like, at least a year, so I need it to happen. I need them to do it. I need them to hear this episode and do it and release it more. So yeah, I have been Maya Ghosh, and this has been my take on the podcast Hot and Bothered, Twilight and Quarantine. Thanks for listening.